Alright, okay. Hi everyone, my name is Nicholas Chan, and welcome to the final episode of Game Mastering Tools and Tricks, a webinar stream by the Roleplaying Gamers Charitable Association. Here we aim to share the various methods employed by veteran game masters in Singapore, and hopefully allow you, our listeners, to gain some knowledge that you might well add to your own GMing arsenals. The RPGCA aims to provide build an inclusive community of role-playing gamers, as well as facilitate and encourage the participation of physically and socially disadvantaged persons in Singapore. Thus, we organize this stream in an effort to share with the tabletop community, and it is our fervent hope that this webinar series will offer you both lessons and a source of comfort in these trying times. Of course, comfort that, despite the ongoing difficulties, gaming communities continue to endure. Today, we are very pleased to have with us in our finale, Jonathan and Kevin from Royal Nerd Theatre, local content creator, the makers of Dice and Dynasty, a D&D campaign that's been inspired by Chinese mythology. They have, in this setting, generated and crafted an entire variety of original characters and NPCs, giving them a variety of perspectives on tabletop RPGs, perspectives which they have agreed to share tonight. So, Kevin, would you give us a quick introduction to yourself and the Royal Nerd Theatre team?
Sure. Hi, guys. I'm Kevin Wee. I and John are two of the co-founders of Royal Nerd Theatre. We are a YouTube channel at the current time, but we aim to create content around RPGs, gaming, and all these things from a more local perspective, a more representative perspective of the sort of Asian perspective. Yeah. Myself, I've been in the film industry for 5 years in Singapore. Before that, I was living overseas in the US, so it explains the accent. I came back to Singapore about 5 or 6 years ago and have been in the film industry ever since.
I'm Jonathan. I've been DMing for, how long has it been? 3-4 years now. I think some of you might know me from DMing around the shops, like for a lot of times, or at a lot of the events and cons. I help out in the local community here, and I'm a mod for D&D Beyond as well, so you see me there sometimes, and I'm glad to be here.
All right, cool. So, this of course, is exactly the reason why we've brought you the RPGCA, and we've been very excited, right, to bring you on board to actually discuss this entire idea of characters, living, breathing characters, or are they? So, many times, right, when you come to GMs, especially maybe I would say GMs that are new, all right, or they focus more on the story itself, right? There's this idea of the characters that they create, right? The balance between caricatures and Mary Sue's. How do we fine tune their interactions with the players? How do we fine tune their identities itself? So, do you guys have any insight? Or I guess no, you guys would have some insight to share with us on this topic itself, right? Can I invite you guys to go ahead?
Do you want to go first, Kevin?
Sure. I speak as both somebody who plays and DMs. I think there is kind of this misnomer floating around about the differentiation between caricatures, Mary Sue's, and everything, because each has their correct time and place. Everything boils down to context, and this is something that's going to be a very common theme throughout everything tonight. Everything boils down to context. If I'm playing a one-shot, if I'm writing a one-shot, if I'm running a one-shot for a group of people who I don't know and don't have a lot of time to prep, I need to have a language that they understand for them to understand the characters that I'm introducing to them. And most of the time that involves using not some overtly like over-the-top caricature, but using a lot of tropes and using a lot of things that are very easy to grasp, easy to understand, easy to relate to for the players. If they don't understand the characters, if I put so much nuance into the characters and like I have a backstory, I have this person's political schemings and like his business partner is trying to backstab him and blah blah blah, all these things, and the players don't interact with it. They don't see all of this nuance and subtlety to the character that you spend way too much time thinking about, when really what they really care about is who is this character, what do they want, where are they in relation to the world at large, and what do they offer, right? That's the most important thing. And so in order to get a lot of these points across really quickly in a one-shot session, you have to kind of rely on tropes. You kind of have to rely on caricatures. It's not so much like I'm making straight up, it's Batman. No, it's not Batman. It's just I've taken a lot of things that you might recognize from a character like, say, Bruce Wayne, a millionaire person who is running around trying to be a philanthropist at the same time doling out justice, right? These are very common tropes that you can run into and use to make people understand what the character is without having to basically write a thesis on this person is such.
So essentially you're saying that in terms of the presentation of the characters, the mediums themselves, right? The GMs should sort of try to get more relatable means, and they shouldn't exactly run away from the borrowing themes that are prevalent, around in comic books or in whatever media.
Yeah, I mean, whatever media you consume, you interact with characters. When you read a book, when you watch a TV show, when you watch a movie, when you read a comic book, you are interacting with these characters and you are slowly absorbing what it means to be one of those characters. What does this character have that makes me really relate to them or dislike them or feel sorry for them, right? There are certain things that will always play true, and the more media you consume, the more likely it is that you will recognize these patterns in the characters you create for yourself. So it's one of these things where people think it's lazy writing to just wholesale use a trope or wholesale use a cliche. But the thing is, cliches exist because they work. Everyone understands it. Everyone recognizes them.
All right. So in terms of like, topical selections or, deriving things or packing things into context, what do you feel, right, is the easiest way to sort of relate or to get these players, right, to identify, right, this character that you're attempting to put across to them? Would you choose like a very easy like movie character? Would you encourage them to do a bit of reading beforehand? Is there some way that is you personally find, right, is more intrusive, I guess, in terms of the minds of the players?
Okay, I'll answer for myself, but I think John might approach this slightly differently. For me, I usually try to get to know what type of media, what type of content do my players like to consume, right? If they all love Lord of the Rings, George R.R. Martin, this kind of high fantasy stuff, then to bring something that's so out of left field for them is going to require more work on my end to try to get them to understand it, right? If they really like this sort of high fantasy Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings kind of stuff, if I then try to bring it into Inhumans versus Avengers as like my main story drive, there is a good chance they don't actually understand or know or recognize these things because I don't know what they have. So what I like to do is I like to ask them. This is going to be a very common theme about DMing. Communication, number one thing. Talk to your players. Find out what they like. Find out what they want. Because if you don't know that, then it's really on you to not that you didn't do your homework on your players. Not so much that they didn't do homework on your world, because each world is tailored to the people who use it, right? You don't bring some gritty DC reboot universe to an 8-year-old table, right? A table full of 8-year-olds won't understand why all the aesthetic is very Zack Snyder, grays and greens, right? Nobody's gonna understand that at the table. But at the same time, like if you have a bunch of war veterans, you're not gonna bring My Little Pony unless they're actually familiar with the source material, right?
Yes, that's very true. So, maybe I can address this question to John. There are
Mhm.
times in the presentation of these NPCs, or in the presentation of these I would say hook characters, that there is a struggle for any new DM, right, to essentially flesh out the backstory, the origin story, if you will. Now, from your experience in both the organized play, adventurous league format, and also in the homebrew formats, right, where do you strike a balance between how much to portray and how much to
Well,
just?
that entirely depends on how much the characters left onto the NPC, because that's like, I'm pretty sure those who have DM before, you can mirror my experience. Like, let's say you at the start, like when you're new, you have this inclination to create this NPC that's like the main NPC that all the players interact with, and for some reason the players will just not care about this main NPC. They'll go to this random NPC that you generated on the spot when they asked you, "What's this guy in the corner who's eating a fish out of the bucket's name?" And you just in a panic give him a name, and like suddenly they love him. Like that happens very often. So what I find is ideal half the time is in terms of backstory, even if it's a major player in your story, for example, say maybe a high lord that's in charge of the entire town. If it's someone who plays a very important part in the plot, I would give them a bit more backstory, in the sense of like I'll think a bit more like what's your motivation, what's the long game, that kind of stuff. Whereas if it's someone who they're just about to meet, I try not to put too much backstory in it. I start with a trope personally, or like someone that I know my players has seen before, like some sort of like archetype, basically.
Mm.
Like it's always an
Oh yeah, yeah.
archetype, like it's a bit like a cliche, but it's a bit more broad than that. It's more like, let's say the archetype is okay. Maybe it's a tracker hunter, and I haven't really, what's the term? Give him a lot of backstory.
Mhm.
The reason is because I don't know how much my players want him. I don't know, like, oh, do they like him? Do they want? So I kind of develop my characters' backstories NPCs' backstories based on how much I know my players will want to interact with them.
Ah, I see. So essentially, what you're getting to is that when you present it, right, you do have some things in mind, but
Mm-hmm.
how far you would, build it up, right, is based on how receptive your players are, to the
Correct,
presentation that you've given.
100% correct. And
Yeah.
another way, like another thing that I tend to do is I work backwards. So
Mm.
let's say I have like how they are currently already, like their mannerisms, everything, and I start working backwards. Like, oh, what brought them to this position? Why do they talk like this? Why do they like want to approach things very cautiously? That kind of stuff. Because I find that it's a lot easier to think about, because like you have the presentation to your players first, which is the thing that they will always see. The backstory, they're not going to see half of it half the time.
Mm.
They'll see like maybe a quarter of it if you're lucky.
So would you say that in that sense, right, the backstory is just as important for the DM as the player? Because for the GM itself, right, or for the DM or whatever that is conducting the game, this document or whatever write up or whatever impression they have in their mind, right, is going to help them to conduct their adventure in a more fluid manner. And it, like as you put it, it might be something that the players don't even see themselves.
Correct. It's more of a helping immerse the players in the experience. Does that
Mm.
make sense? Like you basically get them immersed in like the experience and make sure there's nothing too jarring about this such a person that would drag them out of the whole game or story itself.
Mm.
But definitely the two have to go hand in hand. You can't have a backstory and no presentation, and likewise you can't have presentation but no backstory either.
Right. So, many times when you play video games, there is this sense of frustration that you might feel as a player when you're dealing with characters that are either very difficult or designed to be very difficult to deal with. What would you guys say, right, in terms of this like interaction in the actual D&D game? How to determine best, right, when to start and when to stop, essentially like building up this idea or this like atmosphere of the character.
Well, So let me just clarify. So you're asking what to like. Let's say you have characters who are particularly grating, or
Yes, precisely.
basically they are A, in conflict of the players, and B, they are particularly agitating or grating on the players. Would that be correct?
I suppose that would be extremely useful example to look at, because this will definitely bring you in direct sort of like interaction with the players in terms of frustration levels and so on and so forth.
From a GM's perspective, that I guess it entirely depends. A lot of it is, like Kevin said, very contextual in the sense of like, do I know what players can handle?
Mm.
But I mean, like one of the easier ways I kind of like cop out, it's a cop out to be honest,
Okay.
is that I present such characters such that if you are directly in opposition of them, I tend to later down the line give them the opportunity to get back at this NPC or straight up beat them up.
Okay. So
Like it's the tension is built like, okay, this guy's in conflict, you don't like him, and you have this like as a player you realize like, okay, this guy is an asshole, I really don't like him. And so when I present the opportunity to get back at this person, most players are going to take it.
Okay. So it's like it's also like a subtle form of play agency in that sense.
Yeah.
Actually, so all of this actually revolves around play agency. You see what they want, you see what they respond to, and you like sort of like work your way from there, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So in that context, right, like I guess this is a question for both of you. Many times, there is this idea in games that you might not be the main character, or you might not be the main POV person here, because like you are a character in somebody else's struggle, right? But it can be quite tiring for DMs, right, to keep giving these very epic moments or injecting these very epic characters, right, into the campaign session after session after session. So, do you have any sort of like advice for DMs that might be struggling to sort of like keep up the tempo and, might be putting the pressure on themselves, right, by essentially, introducing character after character after character?
Go for it. Do you want to take it, Kevin?
Sure. I mean, this boils down to a very basic sort of story concept. When you are building any sort of story or telling any sort of story, you want there to be a gradual progression, right? It's like in stage fighting or any action movie, they don't start with the explosions and the bazookas and the big guns and the tanks and the giant monsters. It's always a smaller conflict that slowly grows and builds. And a lot of this comes down to the idea of character growth over story growth, right? You can have epic moments, but epic moments are not moments where you get to understand the characters, right? A good example of this is the Transformer movies. Can anyone honestly name me the character struggles and the wants and the needs and the flaws of any of the human characters in those movies, right? Most people can remember maybe like Shia LaBeouf's character was pining after Megan Fox. That's really about it. But to the scale of like when you have big epic action movies, there's not a lot of space for characters to grow. And that's the thing is, that's why it's so easy for them to replace Megan Fox with Rose Whittington-Huntley in the third movie, because nobody was that attached to any of the actual human characters, because there was no character growth. We grow attached to characters because of character growth. And that's what streams and shows like, Critical Role, Yogscast, all these shows, they do very well, is there is this balance between an epic moment and the quiet sort of reserved moments. Like, I believe John and I have talked about this previously. Like, I usually weigh it up like maybe like 70-30 if I'm being safe. If I know my players are very story driven, I sometimes go 90-10 in favor of character growth over epic moments, right? Like, the idea is for every maybe 3 big epic fights or conflicts you have among important players and important characters in your world, I have like 7 moments where each character has a chance and a spotlight to really kind of grow and explore not just what makes them great, but what makes them flawed. Because that's what endears characters to us, is their flaws. We're not endeared to Batman because he's angry stalker man of the night. No, what endears us to Batman is the idea that he's flawed. No matter how much he wants, he cannot set aside his sense of his moral compass. He cannot set aside that he will not kill, right? We identify with that, and that is, in a way, his flaw, and that is something that we associate with, and we empathize with, and we connect with, right? We don't connect with, I can beat people up really well, right? It's the same. It's the reason why people connect with stories like comic book stories where there is, action, but there is also character growth. You get to see these characters over long periods of time become conflicted, become more concerned with greater things than just I see bad guy, I punch bad guy. Compared to like any of the action movies where it's like, is anyone really endeared to any of the characters from a show like The Raid? Right? Like, it's just, you go in, you beat them up, end of story.
Yeah, pretty much.
I don't know who you are, I don't care who you are, I just like watching you punch someone.
So in that sense, what you're essentially sort of advising, the new GMs that might be looking for ways to make their world more substantial is give them these characters and give them, they might have epic moments, but they also have like downtime. So as simple as like what would set of examples would you give or would you illustrate that you have done, right, or that you recommend for all this like little quieter sort of like real life instances, to illustrate or to like play out with the players itself? What kind of interactions would you think is good for that?
I mean, I think John does this very well as one of his players, but I know something that I do like to do is when you have epic moments, it's always the whole party versus whatever, right? Whatever the problem du jour is, the problem of the day is. Where it gets interesting and where you see character growth is where you have something maybe relating to one of the characters' backstories that you can link to another character, and finding something that ties these two characters together and giving them an excuse to sit down and talk and grow connected to each other. Or even just, if there's no one else that this character can connect to, give them an NPC that they can talk to, right? Where this character growth comes from is from these characters empathizing with each other, as well as the players, but mainly it's the characters empathizing with each other. That's where you get character growth, because if you have, for example, a table of 6 players, and 6 players all doing their own thing, it's not particularly compelling, and nobody feels particularly connected or invested in where they're going, what they're doing. It's when you realize, I'm doing this because I care about player X and their struggle because I relate to that struggle.
Understand. So from that, it's a very thematic kind of like viewpoint, right? That I guess is very good to adopt. But some of the newer GMs, they might struggle with precisely finding, what kind of interaction, what kind of things they should say, how precisely they should present them. So if you guys had to come up with some kind of like a cheat list, right? Like literally how to break your players' hearts kind of thing,
Okay, my numbers.
how would you guys go about it? And it's an example.
Is this Kevin's expertise, or should I talk about it?
Why don't you go ahead first? I'll save mine for after you go.
Like the reason I say this is Kevin's tutorials for like including such like break their hearts in one shots, which is fantastic. But like back to the point, if you're asking about there's no real paint by numbers I wish I could give, but there are definitely like easy ways to add such more soft, tender moments to your game. But first and foremost, like it's very hard to pull off in a one shot, because a lot of times in a one shot, your players, they're not there forever. That you only have so much time to show growth. It's easier to show maybe a single NPC's character growth over a single one shot than it is for player growth, because your players are figuring out their characters. They could be, they just rolled up this character. They don't know what the character is about yet, and and also like, if your players are playing for the first time, they haven't really eased into the idea of like, oh, what kind of narrative beats do I want to play into as well. But that said, like if you have a longer kind of campaign, first and foremost, pull from your players' backstories. Definitely pull from your players' backstories, because that kind of, it gives you ammunition to put it lightly.
Actually,
It gives you
actually,
ammunition for the other players to talk about.
Actually, to build on that, like John and I stumbled across something when we first started doing Dice and Dynasty that we implemented and have since implemented in all our games. It's called the knives theory. It's yeah. So this is something that if you are running a campaign, I find it very helpful. It's the idea of you have 7 knives, right? 7 knives that you give to the DM to stab into your back at any given moment, and it's something that you have to be okay with because you are the one consenting to give these knives to the DM to use, right? It could be something along the lines of, I am being framed for a murder in my hometown and that's why I'm on the road. It could be something along the lines of, I my significant other was killed by the lord of my lands and he wants to frame the murder on me, so I'm on the run. Or even something along the lines of like, both my parents are dead and I don't know who killed them. I am on the search for that, right? These are all knives that you basically, if you can come up with a bullet point list of like, I have 7 of these things that at any given point, the DM is free to pull out and use, it leads to so much more tension in your storytelling as a party, because you as a party, you know, not only do you have 7 knives you've given to the DM, every other member on your table has given 7 knives to the DM. The DM then has this array of things, this arsenal of sort of like backstory plot hooks to like hook in here. Like, oh, you don't know why your parents are dead. All of a sudden you are exploring a cave and you kill a bunch of cultists and then you see your parents' names in a book, right? That is how you play into a knife. But the idea is if you don't have those knives, then it becomes quite tricky, especially for new GMs who are running their first ever campaign, to feel like they have the right to do something like that to their players, right? If you have a bunch of new players who you don't know, like the idea of like, I'm going to institute this idea of your parents were killed by cultists. Maybe your player doesn't want that, right? And rather than have that become an issue, if you set that aside as something you communicate early on, and it's my parents were killed by cultists, or if you say, my parents went out hunting, and my mom stumbled back and said that my father had been gored by a demonic bull, whatever, right? You can come up with whatever it is, but you are essentially consenting to give the DM the right to use that information against your character and your party emotionally, right?
Like,
I think.
Go for it.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Going back to character growth, right? Like a lot of these softer, slower moments basically boil down to 2 characters showing vulnerability, which is complicated naturally because most people don't. Well, like I would say, most people don't understand vulnerability, sharing everything. So like it becomes a very difficult thing for a play. Like it can be difficult for players to grasp that as a storytelling concept. But that's fundamentally what it is. Like giving the knives is basically this contract saying like, here are things that my character doesn't want to exactly share, but I'm okay if the GM pulls this out so that I get like we can explore that as my character. That's part of the thing, and initially like the idea of using knives and everything is something that I do recommend players start to think about. But at the same time, knives have to be something that is detrimental to your character in a way. Like there's no like, what's the term? I'm secretly like when people ask you in the interview and they're like, what's your
greatest flaw? Yeah.
You know, the weakness is like, I work too hard. Like that. No, that's not what I want.
Okay.
That helps me nowhere.
Okay. So I guess what you guys are putting across is a very interesting format, right? Where you use these concept of these knives, right? And then of course, you know, in terms of maybe like a fresh GM, it would be a lot easier if they use an NPC and then like use that as a, I guess, okay, maybe the term is used too strongly, but let's go ahead and use it, like emotional blackmail in terms of making the thing seem more real, more personal, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Would you guys think that's a correct way of looking at
That's
it?
accurate.
I mean, here's a good sort of like comparison to weigh up. Like, who are you going to dislike more? The guy who is just a shitty asshole lord of these people who treats the people who live on his land terribly, or the shitty asshole lord who also murdered your parents? Obviously, you're going to be more invested in one over the other. So if you have that opportunity to create player investment in your characters, you create that depth without having to think way too much about, my character needs a backstory, he needs to have done this, and like I've planned out the past 15 years of his life, down to like, what does he eat in the morning, which leg does he put his pants on first, right? You don't need to think about these, you just need player investment. And to create the best, easiest way to create player investment is just to tie whatever their conflict is with the story to their own internal personal conflict. Because everyone exists in conflict, right? Every character exists in conflict, because if there's no conflict, there's no story. And if there's no story, what are you guys doing at a table, right? So everyone exists in conflict. So if you can tie all these conflicts together, you create a more richer, deeper conflict that everyone is invested in versus, oh, here are just... It becomes like a sitcom of like, we're fighting crime today, let's stop bank robbery, right?
It's always sunny in the Forgotten Realms.
Ah, yes, of course. If it was sunny, like I think that there's that old joke, right, where if you were well adjusted, you wouldn't be adventuring, because why would you, correct?
Exactly.
Okay, so yeah, like moving into this point, right, of like illustration, of certain kinds of concepts to players, right, in order to enrich their experience. Maybe we can go a little bit into role-playing concepts, right? And of course, this particular one, right, I believe both of you are particularly not well versed, right, in experience. How best, right, we're going to encourage new players to step into the shoes of their characters and of course grow attached to the characters that they're placing out, right, on the table with the game master. Yeah. So, Kevin, you have mentioned that you are in the film industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can draw a little bit of parallels, right, between something like directing and GMing, because would you say that it is essentially the same thing or something very, very similar?
Yeah, actually, like, this is an analogy I always use when I talk to John about it. It's like, DMing is directing, right? You're not there to control the story. And, like, not everyone is fully familiar with what a director does on a movie set or anything, but the idea is you're not there to control the performance of your actors. You are there to kind of just help them understand things. There's a lot more goes into conversations and communication between you and the actors and your camera guy and your lighting guy to create something as a whole. Like, your job is just to sort of oversee things. If things are kind of not working, then you can suggest tweaks here and there and see if it works. And the same thing is true in DMing, right? You're not there to control the players, right? And I think this is a trap that a lot of new DMs fall into, is the idea of, I'm going to plan out every single interaction. I'm going to plan out every single conversation. I'm going to plan out this, plan out that, and get so caught up in that planning that they've essentially played the game in their head and in its entirety. Like, they didn't need anyone else at that table with them. They just played that game in their head, right? And that's something that kind of becomes detrimental when they then bring that to the table, because if you've already played the game in your head, when someone else does it differently, it doesn't meet your expectations. And the biggest source of disappointment in life is a disparity between expectation and reality.
Yeah. So in that sense, I guess many a time, right? Considering this topic, right, of characters or NPCs, right? Many times people actually play out this sort of like story in their head, right, through the actions of an NPC themselves. So unfortunately, at times, the NPCs must act in a certain way, or they are designed to act in a certain way, like on cue, if you would, if you would say so, to direct the story in a certain way. What would you tell a GM, right, who has to deal with players that are constantly, sidetracking the quest itself, right, by latching onto the character, or even like reacting or demanding that the character react to them in a way that is not going to propel this story forward?
All right. So I personally, I handle this by creating every new character. I don't actually go into a backstory. I don't write a backstory for any of my NPCs. Most of the time, what I have written down are their needs, their wants, their beliefs, and their flaws. Right? These four things are what make up any character in any sort of storytelling device. You have something you need. You have something you want. Right? These two should always be something different and in conflict with each other. That's what makes a character interesting, right? If you need something that you don't want and you want something you don't need, that's what makes it interesting, right? You don't need to be the richest man in Waterdeep, but you want to be the richest man in Waterdeep, right? Those two things are those two ideas are not the same. Like, you don't need and want the same thing, right? It could be that you want to do this because what you really need is you need the approval of a father figure, right? You need that approval, but you don't want it, right? Like, I'm sure plenty of people know a person in real life who is exactly like this. They need something, but they don't want it. That's what makes someone compelling as a character, like from a very sort of backstory sense. What do they need? What do they want? Make sure these two things are not the same thing. And your beliefs and your flaws, right? What does this person believe, right? Ultimately, there has to be a belief about the world at large, right? I believe that I am God's gift to the world, right? That is a belief, right? But a belief by itself is kind of pointless. The best way to have a belief is to have a belief that you can action. I believe I am God's gift to the world, and anyone who says otherwise deserves to get slapped, right? That's actionable. That means that no matter what your PCs do, if you have an NPC who has this very strong belief, this actionable strong belief, you know how to handle that, even if they go off book.
Okay, so would it be accurate to say that, you know, it's a difference between sort of like a purposeful structure and an oppressive cage? To draw in these new players, right, to step into their shoes, you want to give them like a illustration of something that they can do to influence the entire thing, as opposed to this character that comes down, right, and just like steps on them and says that, oh, all of you are my sort of property now, you know, you have to play according to how I do that. And it's like sometimes maybe it's reflective of the DM expressing themselves.
I mean, people play D&D to sort of interact with a story, not interact with Westworld robots.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a very good way of putting it. So, you know, on that topic, right, you know, of course, you know, when we are talking about, you know, characters, or from both points of view, whether it's the player character or whether it's the NPC, right, there is this idea that as you play along a certain campaign, even within the campaign, if it's a one shot or one session or like a 7-session campaign, evolution is quite important. So, John, how would you, you know, portray this evolution, right, you know, in terms of your NPCs, and how would you tie it into this fresh players to sort of like, you know, keep drawing them into this experience that they are having.
Okay. Like going back to Kevin's point, it also depends on your players. Again, I've seen a wide gamut of players. But anyway, but back to your point, it definitely can be daunting, especially like at the start. You will want to try to plan everything out. It's only natural.
It's like the Marvel, like phase 1, phase 2.
Yeah, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3.
The difference is how watching a movie, right?
But here's the thing, like the one thing I tell every DM, like if you GM, you will understand what I mean. If you don't, if you deny what I'm about to say, you haven't GM'd enough. This is general rule, but no plan survives first contact with your players. No plan will ever survive first contact in its entirety with the players. And you need to be willing to accept that.
Okay.
Like as a GM, like the sooner you accept this, the better. And so like from there you can develop several ways to deal with it. Some people like to they try to think about what scenarios they can have and try to link back if players do certain things. And then like eventually you get to the point where you know how to naturally react to it. The way I tend to do it is like I basically try to figure out what is going on in the world while the players are doing their thing. That is to say, I try not to anticipate what the players are going to do. I just think like, okay, what are the currently in this session? What is the most important plot thread or plots that are happening right now that the players are trying like following, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the basic idea is like I don't have a full plot structured out. I have like bits and a bit more of a modular idea of like, oh, if they do this, then like this plot gets pushed here, then this happens, and then I'll have to figure something out from here. Because that way it evolves a bit more naturally and organically, and you give the players the agency they want of like, I am affecting things by my action or inaction. You give them that agency of like saying that if you guys want to do this, sure, but just be aware that this is happening right now. And then they say, yeah, we're fine. Like, what? There's a revolution to overthrow the kingdom. I don't care. I want to sell bread. And it's like, sure, I'm not going to stop you.
Yeah, like on that point itself, right? On the idea of this organic growth, right? Like I therefore I do definitely understand where that from that kind of view of like accepting the players' actions and doing that, right? You make the growth seem a lot more organic to them. So herein comes the question: what if players, right, continually insist on taking actions, right, or like grow or doing their growth, right, that is not conducive to either A, themselves, or B, the entire party, or even C, the structure of the story itself? How are you gonna deal with something like that?
I have to say like having it spiral on the humor is something I'm 100% guilty of sometimes, because like in the moment of the plot you make a decision and then you go back to your notes, you realize, shucks, this conflicts with this, and then you have to rewrite several things.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, like, that doesn't always turn out the way you want. I'm definitely guilty of that. But I think it's a lot of that comes down to the type of players you have on your table. Like, granted, you can't have that in a one shot, because one shots are like public tables are a wild west of everything. They run a massive range because people want to play different things. I guess the whole idea of like, if it spirals out of control, a lot of time it is due to me as a GM misunderstanding what my players want sometimes. Because like it could be like I thought they wanted this, but turns out they want this, which is in the end of the day it's something that every GM will naturally fall into, just because people are complicated. People don't say the thing they want to say, and so like unfortunately there is a lot more. There's a lot more burden that I think players don't really realize on the GM side, is that the amount of emotional work and like people work you have to do to like really suss out what is it this player actually wants, because a lot of times the players don't know what they want.
Actually, to build on that from a previous point, people, like the previous point I had about needs and wants, people can tell you what they want. People rarely can tell you what they need.
Yes, 100%. It's probably it's a human condition. Like, that is something natural that you get better with time, I will be honest, but it's not something like just expect for things to not go your way, because the plot won't go your way. Sometimes you might misread what the player wants, and you realize, oh, this is what the player actually wants, and then you give it them later, and then they get very happy.
So in terms of that, in terms of, let's say, like a player, right, that might, a DM, right, that might try to present this particular character as the introduction to a specific quest, from your point of view, if let's say like I would or the player were to go to this character, this prepared character, and go like, hey, can I do this with you instead? And it leads you to, at that point of time, making a decision to say that, okay, never mind, sure, let's go on and do this other thing. It's perfectly fine to just roll with it, is it?
Yeah, like the biggest thing is like it's kind of like an improv thing, where you improv has this concept called yes and. Like that's what I started out with, and I think as I've GM'd over the years, I've realized like it's a bit more nuanced than that. It has to be the prompt is kind of tweaked to be yes but, if that makes sense. That's to say, you are agreeing to the player's agency of whatever actions they want to do, but you have to figure out how to fit it into what you have currently around as well.
That's
there basically has to be some sort of middle ground for both of you to reach. If you have a player who's like, no, I want to do exactly specifically this, and then you gotta, that's a whole different thing that you have to figure out.
So would you say, right, that in that context that you've given, right, in that specific example, all right, the portrayal of an NPC, right, in a negotiation with your players, right, sort of might lessen the blow, right, for your players that, they are not going to exactly get what they totally want in this case, and then the story sort of like is going to take a little bit of precedence over their actions.
Sometimes you need to do that. It depends on the scale of like how big of like you have to read the table. A lot of a big GM skill is reading your table.
Okay.
Which is like you have to read the table. Like, is there something really big that they want? Like, then if it is, then you will have to figure out a way to put it in.
Actually,
if it's something really minor,
Mm.
then like you can like probably bargain somewhere around there.
Actually, there's a concept that I really like from Burning Wheel, which, I mean, John was the one who introduced me to Burning Wheel. He got me my copy of the book, and it's one of my favorite RPG systems out there. But something I did borrow from that, and I do take into D&D, is the idea of the consequential pass. Right? I actually set 2 DCs in my head. There is a DC of, this is the pass, right? Like, let's say DC 16. That said, I also set a second DC in my head of, like, DC 13. Like, subtract 3 if it's not that difficult a thing to do. So it's like DC 13. If you meet a DC 13, you do get what you want, but there are consequences. For example, it's the thing of, like, you want to, say, grab this person by the coat, right, as they're being abducted. If you roll high, like close enough, but not quite there, you grab the coat, yes, but that person does still get abducted, and you're left standing there holding the coat. You did get to do what you wanted to do, according to how you worded it to be, but you don't get 100% of what you wanted, right? And if you hit that 16, 100%, you grab that person, and that's that, right? So it's about... I call them graduated skill checks, where there is the first bar to pass and the second bar to pass.
I call it failing forward.
Failing forward.
Failing forward.
Failing forward.
Oh, okay, that's a very interesting concept. So, yeah, actually, this idea of like failing forward, it definitely like gives the impression that, hey, I am executing whatever it is I planned. It's just that it's not turning out exactly the way I want it to, which is I guess very nice for a any type of new player that's coming in, right? But if we're on the topic, right, of all this kind of like a little mechanic actions that you can do in the game itself, right, to portray these things. Okay, let's not be too isolated by the NPCs. What is some like ways and method, right, or that you guys can suggest in particular beyond what we have already talked about, right, to further I guess portray the entire environment to the players?
In what sense? Sorry.
So in the sense of like perhaps let's go into growing attached to their characters, all right? Stepping into the shoes of their characters. You specifically want the character to sit down at your table, right, and have an experience out of their world, that kind of thing, Yeah. So any like tips that you all have, right? Because you guys do seem to have a number of tips, so let's try to capitalize on that.
Sure. Okay. So this is what I like to call RP buy-in, right? You buy into your character, you buy into the concept of your character. And that's the important thing, is it's your character, right? So it's something as simple as, I always use the third person when I talk about my character. It's, Fandwil does this, Fandwil does that, right? If you just take the time to just change that into the first person, that's already a huge step. And that's something that very simply can be done at any table. Just the simple act of saying, I close the door. I grab the guard by the neck. I try to pick his pocket, right? You start to take ownership not just of the character, but their actions. And in time, you can build upon that. And like some people, I think Kelvin mentioned this in the first session, the idea of like people want to do voices because they've watched Critical Role. And that's the thing, is like these people are trained voice actors, their voices are used to this, they can do accents and weird voices. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of practice. If you want to do that, by all means, that's a great sort of end goal to have. Yeah, an ultimate goal to have, but you can start by doing something smaller, right? If your character is, say, smaller, just start speaking with a slightly higher pitch, right? You can keep this up without feeling too sort of like tired at the end of a 4-hour session. Versus like if you go straight into squeaky voice, goblin voice, doing this for 4 hours, you will die.
I've done that before.
Yes, John.
Oh, wow.
We made John do that for about 4 hours once.
Okay. So, you would say like sort of like there's a like in interaction voice and DMing voice lah. There's like that voice where you are reading out a story and there's voice where you're portraying a character, but it doesn't have to be that much different. It's just like little inflections here and there.
Even just for the players, just having a differentiation between, I'm asking this out of character versus I'm talking about this in character. Even just the smallest thing of just like I start speaking a little bit faster, right? Or I maybe just change like the way I say it. Maybe I say it a little more slangily, or maybe I speak more rigidly, right? Like small things can be just like I don't use contractions, so it's like I do not use contractions, right? Small things like this can set a voice apart on a very subtle level, but on a level that slowly begins to build, and you start to feel that differentiation between like your voice and the character's voice, and being able to jump back and forth between the two, you'll start to think more and more in the mind of the character.
So from the DM's perspective, if they adopt this, method, right, they can disassociate themselves from DMing at that point of time to truly assume the identity of this NPC that the players are interacting with.
Mm-hmm. And it's something that helps signal to the players, I am now speaking to you as your DM. I'm now speaking to you as this character.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very interesting trick, What about like in terms of expressing, actually like while we're on the topic of, voices, right? What would you guys say, right, would be a good benchmark to look at, right, when you're expressing maybe more negative emotions like anger, fear, jealousy, that sort of thing? Because there are some people that feel that, hey, it's just a game, why are you getting angry with me, that sort of thing.
Are you talking about in character or out of character?
But definitely in character, yeah.
Like I have experiences where like sometimes this is something I'm self-conscious about. But like I have had multiple experiences where I think I'm in the character voice, but people still ask me like out of character questions, and then I have the spotlight on myself. Like, am I not making obvious enough? Like that does happen.
I mean, it's something that does happen. I think especially for negative emotions, because negative emotions are something that affect people very viscerally and very readily. I think something as small as saying, just starting out with out of character in a different voice. Just the first half of a sentence saying something along the lines of like, I turn to the guard and I growl, like, let him go, right? Something along those lines. Like in that moment, you realize this person has like shifted. Or in the DM's case, it could be something along the lines of just describing the scene, setting the scene before the anger comes in, and understanding that that is the same thought helps to dissociate that anger from feeling personal, right?
It's a gradual preempting, let's put it that way.
Yes, a gradual preempting without breaking immersion.
You set it up, and then you describe what they do before they go into the anger, as opposed to jumping straight into the anger, because that becomes this very, like, it can feel personal. Whereas compared to something more of a gradual thing, you ease them into it.
Oh, so it's like something like as opposed to like you suddenly slam the table and you shout like, oh, I will kill all of you. You can like play it up in the scene by describing it. You see this this creature, he starts to rise up, something like that. You set up. It's at the end of the day, it's still an expectation thing, right?
Yeah, you're setting out the expectation that something is going to happen. That way, there is this understanding that this anger, this outburst, is part of the theater and not part of this personal experience you are in person feeling at the table, right? If you, like you said, like there's a difference between slamming your hands on the table and going, bang, I will kill all of you, versus like, as you see the carousing in the room, you realize that one corner of the room is very silent. As your eyes drift over there, you notice a shadowy figure hulking over and sulking as he begins to raise to his feet. You hear a slam on the table. I will kill all of you, right? There is immediately a difference between these two experiences.
Yeah. Okay. So, on that note, right, with regards to voices and everything, right, what about, body language. What about like actual sort of like standing up and portraying things like that? Where do you guys like stand on that, right? And if you have like any advice, right, for anybody that might want to inject a bit more, shall we say, liveliness into the character that they're portraying?
I think dynamic movement is and body language is very important, but you need to also be aware that there are confines of space, right? If you're at a small table with a bunch of people, don't have a character that's flailing his arms around that might smack into someone else, knock over their papers or knock over their dice, right? You still want to be considerate and mindful of those things, but having small body and there's something in linguistics called oral posture. Just the way that you shape your body can change the way that your voice comes out, right? It could be if you slump your shoulders, there's actually more force being pulled on the bottom of your throat, and you sound a little more kind of drawn out. Versus like if you sit up more straight, there's more space, and your voice actually comes out more deeper and richer. Like these are small things, and just something as small as shifting the way you sit can differentiate a voice and a character from your normal voice.
So like maybe I can direct a question at John, right, with all the sort of like people that you've seen on the tables itself. When people start to react, negatively to whatever means you're portraying, right? And sometimes I guess it could be said that it's not really the GM's fault, because as you put it, you might not always know who you're playing with, or you might not always know who you're DMing for, right?
Exactly.
What are some of the things, right, that we can look out for in terms of like your portrayal of your character, right, to know that, hey, you're going too far, and if you do reach that threshold, right, what is some actions that you can immediately take, right, to sort of like cut it and bring the tension and mood down at the table?
So you're talking about like in the game itself or something else?
Probably in this context, like in the game itself, right, where people are uncomfortable with the manner of which the game is being portrayed, or the manner in which the character is being portrayed. Like literally, you're that good.
A lot of it boils down to, like, if you're always unsure, that doesn't hurt to ask, like, check, like, our character to check. If you're talking about in game, it's not something I'm going to spring you, like. It's not something I will spring on you like the first time you meet this NPC, that kind of stuff, because it that can be super jarring and can make a person, especially when it comes to like all these kind of negative feelings like aggression, lashing out, frustration. It can make people extremely uncomfortable because your body processes it as if you are being attacked. So the whole point of like the gradual progression of like building the expectation is to ease them into it. The moment you just like it's like throwing people into like the cold swimming pool. You want to let them like have a leg in, slowly ease their way in, then just throw them, and then like, oh hey, we just arrived at the pool, and then just push them in the water. You don't want to do that.
Makes sense.
But if then from the other point of view, it's like if you are at a point where the story is kind of like you are very aggressive, and it is very clear that your players are not really like super uncomfortable to the point they will hate you and everything, but you can tell they are uncomfortable. There's nothing wrong with easing it back as a character. And then like as a character, even though you are angry, you still want like something out of this fundamentally. Like a whole aggression outburst doesn't just because you're angry. Like it's because something is unmet. An expectation as a character is unmet. You can always offer them something else, like a bargaining chip, that kind of stuff, to slowly ease them. Like this person is not entirely unreasonable. He's like 80% unreasonable.
Okay. So it's the idea, going back again to the idea of a purposeful structure, always giving a cause, a reason to your actions as you play them out.
Basically, at the end of the day, everything should serve the narrative one way or the other. An outburst for the sake of an outburst as a character does nothing to serve the plot. Which is why sometimes I'll like say like, oh, the guy is now like yabbering in gibberish, and like he looks totally off the cuff instead of like really acting into it. Why? Because it doesn't serve anything to the players or to the plot.
Okay.
I can just leave it at that, and they will get the intent of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, these are very good tips, I guess, that could be applied to not just actually not just new GMs lah, but I think any GMs even worth their salt, right? That may have been having some kind of like issues dealing with these kind of emotions and things on the table. All right, we're gonna take a short 15-minute break, so we'll come back at 8:15. Just let the guys, drink some water. They've been
Yeah, I
obviously
get a
talking
really
and
short
sharing us
break.
a lot. So yeah, we'll be back everybody at 8:15. Right.
Okay,
See you then.
Cool. See you in 15.
see you in 15 minutes. Yeah.
Hello.
Okay, and we're back. Let's see. All right. So, on the topic of this, living, breathing characters, right? You will sometimes find, or you might sometimes find, right, that in terms of the interaction between the various characters, between the players, between you, between themselves, right, there might be instances where you see at the table, right, that there's a lot of conflict, right, and it is the job of the DM that sometimes, right, to essentially start to resolve this conflict. So in terms of the perspectives of like a new player, right? What do you guys think, right? If like let's say you encounter a table, right, where it is the atmosphere isn't exactly very friendly because it's very high paced, very high tension, high strung, right? And how can these situations be managed and facilitated as they unfold?
Okay. So I think for the expectations at a table, they need to be set at the beginning of a session. But let's say we don't have that, right? If we don't have the expectation of what we expect to see at a table, then there becomes a disconnect between what the GM and the players want, right? The players want to have an experience that is fulfilling and enjoyable and something they want. But even among the players, not all of them are going to have that same level of expectation, same level of what they want. So I think the most important thing here is the same thing that can be solved through anything is through the act of communication. If you sit in on a session and you find that you don't actually enjoy that session or whatever, it's very important that you do voice it out. Because I don't think very many GMs would take it personally, like it's something wrong with them or it's their fault that you didn't have fun. Sometimes people don't have fun and it's nobody's fault other than just expectations were different than what expectations were just different from reality. Like I said, like that is the basis of all disappointment. It's just expectations and reality not being the same. It's not a personal thing, right? It's not a you're a bad DM, I didn't have fun, right? It's a collaborative effort. This is, and we keep saying this thing every time we introduce D&D to people or we talk about D&D, is that it is a collaborative storytelling game.
Yeah, so from that perspective, considering that the entire team here is collaboration or the entire team is working together, right, you will definitely get cases where people, they look at each other, they look at the behavior, and then they think to themselves like, hey, you're not being a team player, or hey, you're not being part of one of us, right? And then there's this kind of like divide that occurs, not sometimes not even between the DMs and the players themselves, but within the players. From your experiences, right, how would a DM manage or resolve that issues?
You want to take this one, John?
Yeah, I'm guessing John will have a little bit more experience on this because you've seen your fair share of these public tables.
Do you mind repeating the question for me?
Oh, no worries. Okay, so like in
All
terms
good.
of like yeah, no worries. In terms of the players, right? When you are playing at the table and then like there's this atmosphere that isn't very friendly, there's this like people might point out to you that hey, when you are interacting with these characters, right, you're not really doing that well, and then that leads to some kind of like resentment between the players itself. What do you as a DM, right, think could be done, right, or what would you do personally? Some of your strategies, right, to deal with these kind of problems as they crop up.
You mean like play? You mean amongst different players, right?
Yeah,
Like
amongst
basically two players, their characters kind of conflict. The way they portray their characters kind of in conflict.
or like I guess that's one
Or it
such
could
scenario.
be,
Yeah, could be even be like a divide
or
within
it
the
could
table
be.
itself. Yeah,
Okay, wow, that is a loaded question.
yeah.
That's something you will see a bit more often, especially on public tables.
Mm-hmm.
Because naturally public tables you don't have the comfort of saying, hey, your play style is a bit disruptive compared to everyone else. You don't have that comfort. As in, like, you can turn them away, but sometimes they do edge on that weird line of like it's only uncomfortable to certain people, or they clearly have a bone to pick with person A out of the entire table, and that kind of adds the whole atmosphere to it. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, you as the GM and as the person in charge will have to be the adult in the situation, even though some of them are older than you. I say this from experience. And there's no easy way out of that, if I'm being entirely frank, in the sense that you can do what you can to get the characters to interact, but you can't force it if fundamentally the players don't want to interact. Like I have times where like I've had to drag the two people and like, okay, you guys are, I know you two have a bone to pick with each other. Can you not drag that to the table? I've had to pull people, like full-grown adults. I have to pull them off the table and tell them that if this is becoming an issue, can you solve it outside? Don't drag it to my table. If you continue to do this, I'll just ask you to just not play. Because it's fundamentally it's like I think a lot of us joke like, oh, your fun is wrong. Like I think that's something we all joke about. But the truth of the matter is your fun is wrong when your idea of having fun impacts other people having fun.
So in terms of like facilitating or managing, I guess what you're saying is like DMs shouldn't be afraid, right, to take that very that stance, that like draw the line in the sand and say, right, hey, you stop it now and then get out because you guys are really not helping the situation and you guys
like,
are not being reasonable.
Of course, it's not. Yeah, definitely 100%. Of course, it's not easy also because if you're someone like me who has problems asserting yourself, sometimes it can be super daunting. Because you're like you don't know if you want to, what's the term? You don't know if you can do that because like, oh, this person's older than me. Oh, they've played more. Where does my authority come from? You have the authority as the game master to do that. Because fundamentally, it is your game. You are the arbitrator of the rules. You are the person that everyone trusts to make a fair judgment on the rules, and with that implies some sort of authority.
Would you go so far as to say?
But because of that, sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, you sort of lagged out a little bit on there. Maybe you want to repeat the sentence you just said.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
No, I was saying you can go for it first.
Oh, sure. Oh, okay. So in that illustration that you have given, right? Yeah. Is it? Yeah. So in terms of the illustration that you've given. No worries.
Give me 1 minute. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Let's wait for him to.
Is this better? Oh, this is way better.
Oh yeah. It is.
Yeah.
So you were earlier saying, of that idea of the DM, right? Like you should be aware that you hold a greater balance of power in the entire equation of this session, and like not be shy to exercise it if let's say people are really coming to physical or like verbal or even physical blows in the game itself. But in terms of, let's say, softer approaches, right? Using the characters, using the NPCs that you have at your disposal, any tricks you have, right, that you can share that you use to arrest, these kind of negative emotions among your players before they even spiral out of control?
For that, sometimes there are some things like that. Like if it's bleeding very strongly into the characters, right? And naturally it will.
Mhm.
Sometimes it can be as easy as just shutting the two of them into the two characters into a room and forcing the two people to talk it out. It can be as easy as that sometimes.
Okay, I'm
And
going
other
to
times it
assume
could
that
be
this is in game, right? You're not actually gonna
in-game.
bring them to like a dark room and then just lock them up.
I've been tempted. Like, sit down, you two kids. You're throwing tantrum. Work it out, and then like shut the door. These don't take 4 hours. No, please don't do that.
Something else.
That's illegal.
Something I do use is there's this idea of like if you try to put someone who is stronger than them in a situation as some sort of arbiter, they're gonna see that as a challenge, and they're gonna be like, I want to fight that person.
So it's the idea of the common enemy, basically, like something coming out of nowhere.
Yes, there is another option as well, which is if you can't put someone there who is stronger than them to tell them to, in character, like, sit down and behave, you can always go more emotionally manipulative than them. They will fight a town guard. They will not fight a child.
So like it goes back to the idea of like common goals, common enemy. Everything is built around this idea that, hey, you guys are a team, so this is a team effort. Like let's go for it, sort of thing, right?
It's definitely the idea of commonality. Yes, 100%.
Okay, so like for conflict resolution wise, I guess there are many ways of like looking at the situations, right? But of course, I guess like resolving a conflict after it has already occurred, right, is the second best way of solving the issue. Of course the best way, the optimum way, right, would be like a DM that can help to manage emotions, be a force of support, just like be that kind of like a all-seeing kind of a father down there that is just like regulating everybody, right? Of course, it's not expected that any GM or any DM, right, even those that are veterans, right, might be able to do that, right? But I'm pretty sure that, with your experiences, right, you can share one or two tricks, right, that maybe people can start to slowly build up from, slowly work out from, right, to become better GMs, I would say.
Hang on, I have a goddamn flowchart for this.
Oh, okay, sure.
I just paste it in the I just put it in the Tavern chat. I have an actual flow chart for this, which I highly recommend. Like any GM, if you have problems, if there are behavioral problems on your table, print this on and slap it on your GM screen.
Okay, can.
And then follow it to the goddamn letter.
Yeah,
like
could you walk us through this. I'll give you
a quick walkthrough. So like it starts off like a player or GM does something that you don't like, because this is something it's catered for everyone. Because behavioral problems aren't necessarily all these players. Like there are GMs who power trip and go crazy. We've seen that before. So like the first point you should do is what Kevin stresses all the time: talk to them like an adult.
Communication is key, guys.
All right, sure. So like I mean, in terms of like okay, so let's delve into a little bit more of a sensitive issue here, right? Definitely, in terms of this like hobbies of RPGs, right, or like any tabletop hobbies in which we open up the access to everybody, you are going to get people that come in, right, that will display a little bit of maybe let's say mental sort of behavioral issues that they might not be aware of. Okay, they might have been grappling for quite some time, right, and still unable to solve, right? But I guess we don't really want to turn them away from this open access thing, right? And we don't want to deny them the opportunity to have fun itself. And according to all the things that we've talked about in the last 1 hour or so, right, even a chance to improve themselves through the medium of the game. So where is the DM's strength, right? Or sorry, where is the DM's position in there, right? How can they use that position, right, to embolden and help and assist these sorts of people?
DM's position is that because there is that sort of implicit faith you trust your GM, implicit trust that you trust your GM to make sure to give a fair ruling. There is an implicit trust. So because of that, that authority basically means that you as a GM, you have to do the right thing a lot of the time, which is understandably can be a very difficult thing to do. It does also mean that the GM sometimes has to be the one to initiate the difficult conversation. Like, sits around there, okay, guys, need to talk. You know the look, the relationship will look like where the person sits you down, your partner sits you down, like, we need to have a talk. And you're just like, you as a GM, you need to be that person a lot of the time.
I think to build on that, and this is something that's quite near and dear to my heart, I want to talk about the issue of mental health. Because, there is a very noticeable stigma, especially here in Singapore and Asia in general, against this idea of mental health. Like, this is a very common thread of things that we hear from our peers, our parents, our aunts, our uncles, our grandparents, that, only crazy people need therapy, that only if you are having mental issues, it's because you're weak and you should just be happy and that will solve everything, right? These are very common things that get said. And so there is a lot of stigma against this idea of mental health and honestly, mental wellness as well. When we say mental health, a lot of people have this idea that there must be something wrong. But the idea is it's about mental wellness. Even people who don't have anything explicitly wrong, they benefit from this idea of mental wellness and taking care of your mental state. And there is this concept that the stigma actually prevents people from actually seeking the help they need. And again, this is a need that they don't want. It prevents them from seeking out this help. And so a lot of them bring that, for lack of a better term, baggage to the games. And they start treating the game like a therapy session and the DM like a therapist in that sense. And a lot of it is they're trying to work through certain issues that they don't have an avenue to work through in their day-to-day lives. And this is something that it's quite sad to see that people don't feel capable of expressing this in their day-to-day lives, but it's something that, honestly, personally, I encourage anyone who's having a hard time, in your life, even during this lockdown period. We joke about how stir-crazy we're going, but some people truly do feel a sense of isolation, a sense of depression, a sense of a lot of things going wrong in their life, and sometimes just having someone to talk to is good. And sometimes it's good to have someone to talk to who you aren't related to, you're not going to see every day, that you don't have a vested interest in. There's no conflict of interest there, right? That's where people should honestly go seek out the help of counselors. There are plenty of free services, even in Singapore. My mom does work with the Singapore Association of Mental Health, the SAMH. I will provide a link in the tavern chat, but if anyone just needs someone to talk to, sometimes having someone to talk to is great. And sometimes, as a DM, you can see that is actually what's going through the heads of your players, the minds of your players, that your players actually just want an avenue to express themselves, an avenue to talk, to share, and to feel connected. And sometimes, just encouraging them to be like, hey, I'm just taking them aside. Hey, I noticed you're going through a rough patch. Listen, we're friends. I'm always here to listen to you. But if you want to have someone who is maybe more qualified to talk to you about some of these issues than me, encourage them to go find some professional help.
So in terms of so in that sense, maybe not everybody is going to be fortunate enough to know that they are currently going through a certain state of health, or they're exhibiting certain problems. Maybe let's bring it down to more simple terms. Somebody that is always shouting in games because he genuinely is very excited to play the game, but he's not aware that the shouting, right, is affecting everyone else at the table. That sort of thing. What are some words of encouragement that you as a DM, right, might give to this sort of a player that's exhibiting this sort of behavior? You don't want to discourage him from coming to your games because you know he's having fun. You know that he's getting a real value out of interacting with your characters, interacting with your players, right? What's some things that you can say, or what some things you can do in that sense, right, to sort of calm him down a little bit, right, but still give him that experience he's looking for?
I think this is something that is best solved in, again, to use a term that you used in the first session with Kelvin from Sunny, is this idea of aftercare. Right? When you talk to players, it's not just a question of, did you enjoy the game? What did you like? What didn't you like? Sometimes there are behavioral patterns that show up. Like, this person is particularly jumpy and shouty. And sometimes it's a question of, hey, can I just ask why? Right? Getting to the heart of the reason of why are you like so excitable? Like, it's great. Like, I love that energy. Please keep that up. But I would like to know, like, where is this coming from? Like, maybe it's very different from who they normally are, right? If you see them and interact them on a normal basis, maybe they're very quiet, and all of a sudden they're very loud and shouty and on the borderline of being disruptive, and you're not sure how to handle that. Sometimes it's just a question of, listen, I just want to know, like, where is this coming from? Like, I'd like to know that, because then when you start talking to someone about something and understand, and they hear it from a more sort of like supportive and positive light, they become more self-aware. And when you become self-aware, you become more empathetic towards other people, and like, there are other people at this table, and like, if they're also shouting, you wouldn't be able to hear each other, right? We want to have a game where we all hear each other, and not a fish market where we're all shouting at each other.
So let's say, like, it's right in the middle of the game itself where things are heating up. So maybe you're a victim of your own success. You built up a very tense kind of environment. You've got like players like saying, "Oh no, don't kill this guy, he's my favorite guy," and they're going to save it, right? And like, that kind of like interaction, right, is starting to lead the players to become a lot more for lack of a better word, quarrelsome with each other, or like high strung. Okay. At that moment of time, the moment the DM notices, right, that the entire table is becoming that sort of like very explosive, it's like a powder keg, right? What are some prescriptive things that you recommend, or that you can take at that point of time that will sort of like help to smooth over or diffuse the situation a little bit?
Something I like to do is very simply just, the moment you realize things are breathing up to a fever pitch, is actually the perfect time to take a break. It's basically like in any TV show, you build up the suspense, cut to commercial break, right? Or cut to the end of the episode and then come back next week, right? These are actually very genuinely helpful tips in terms of storytelling and pacing. Because the thing is, if you take a break there, it gives them time to think about why they are feeling the emotions they're feeling, and not just feeling the emotion, right? So it could be something along the lines of like, hey guys, all right, so we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. I'm going to go run out and buy teh. Does anyone else want kopi or teh, right? Something along those lines. Or like, hey guys, let's take a quick bio break, and then we'll get back to it. I know everyone's a little intense, so everyone just make sure you stretch your legs. And if you want, get some fresh air. We'll be back here in like 5 minutes, right? Keep it a short break. Like, this is something that is very good for sort of like diffusing the tension. Taking a short like 5-minute break, encourage people to go get some fresh air, get a drink, something just to sort of remind them that while they're feeling this emotion in the game, it is still, a separate level from reality.
So, there are some times, right, where you will invite players to have conflicts with you as the DM, because you are portraying a character that is, of course, directly opposed to them, or directly sort of like interfering with whatever they want to achieve. From the position of the DM, right, how would you guys go around sort of like enforcing that kind of like, I guess, divide, between their characters doing whatever they want and you having a story to tell, right, without making it seem like you're actually sort of like trying to bulldoze or bully all the players, right, into following your story?
Wow, that's a bit of a more nuanced question. That is to say, it's definitely not easy. There's definitely a balance to be had that you have to strike when, over time, like a good antagonist is not a one and done deal. A good antagonist is always it's the recurring antagonist, correct? Like they slowly over time ramp up that kind of intensity over the course of many sessions to get the players to hate them. Let's put it that way. But the good point about that is that you can, because of that, you kind of stagger out all the emotions. So they don't feel, they are a bit more cognizant of the fact that this is a NPC, this is a villain.
I think
Another regard, sorry, go for it.
I was gonna say, I think the other thing to think about is the concept of balance, right? You are the DM. You are not one character. You are essentially the world as a whole. So if you make a world where every single NPC is against the players, then yes, you are gonna feel a lot of that antagonism towards you. But you want to balance that with, like, here is this antagonist who you cannot touch and you hate him, and the one thing you all want right now is to, like, just get after him. But at the same time, here are these wonderful people that you have met who are, genuine and caring, and you care about them, right? If you balance these two, that's where people sort of, like, see you as the DM as the world and not just the representation and manifestation of this one thing I hate.
I would go one more limb and, like, actually have, like, animals.
Animals.
Yeah, animals for the players, because players latch on to animals. Like that's something I have noticed very quickly. Like, if I say, "Oh, here's this injured owlbear cub," and then you as the GM, you make the noises, like, your players are gonna latch on to that shit. They're just like, "Oh no, this is my baby. I will protect this."
John, are we talking about my character now?
No comments.
So, like, soft, fluffy things are basically.
But, yeah, like,
the mood.
basically, as a sharp, like, as long as there's the sharp contrast of, like, okay, this is the one NPC I really, like, I as a player hate, and then the GM can contrast that, like, the DM playing a character that they like or something that they like. It helps like, divide that, like, you see, like, okay, the players are clearly antagonistic to this one thing and not to this innocent owlbear cub that did nothing to them. If the players start killing the owlbear cub, then okay, then there's many questions you need to ask.
Okay.
I call it bribing with fluff.
Yeah.
But I get what you mean. It's like the kind of presentation where it's not personal. It's just the
Yes.
world as it is. I'm not out to get you. I'm just trying to show you the multitude of things inside this place.
Exactly. Everything's like a degree of something. Let's put it that way.
Okay. All right. I guess let's take some questions from the audience in the tavern chat, because there's quite some interesting amount of questions that's coming up. So I have a user Nick going Guan. I think all of you know who this is.
Hi, other Nick.
It's the other Nicholas. The question is, what's the balance between having an important NPC maintain character traits and having that character have growth? So I guess maybe it's something like how far does the character evolve?
Yeah, okay. I think this one, I'll quickly go on the story aspect of it, and then, John, you can talk about it from a DM perspective. From a story perspective, when characters change, you don't want them to change too quickly, right? You don't want characters to have a sudden 180 and then you don't recognize the character anymore, because that isn't believable, and that isn't realistic, and that isn't something that people latch onto. The best way to sort of handle that from a story perspective, personally, is to change one thing, right? People change gradually over time, and if you show that the one change this person has made is they've shifted their view about this one thing to be something else, that is a sense of growth. And over time, like over a long period of time, they may change all of their views. But we start with, no matter how much your players want to change the mindset of, say, the major villain, maybe they can convince him not to kill the entire city, or not raise this demon hellspawn, right? But they can really only change one thing about him at a time, right? They can change that about him, and he may agree, okay, maybe this was a bad idea. That's fine, because that is still change. He's still keeping true to who he is, and that is change. And then through other interactions, another story arc, then he changes something else. Like, they manage to change his mind about, okay, maybe the world isn't such a uncaring place, right? Then he's changed one other thing. You build block by block. And slowly, that character will change and become somebody who maybe from evil has a change of heart and becomes good, right? But that change doesn't happen overnight. That change happens piece by piece.
Okay. Yeah.
From a GMing point of view, like what I try to do is that have the NPC should have character growth. I do agree, but if it shouldn't be, and that NPC's character growth shouldn't be super bombastic on like a total 180 like Kevin says,
Mhm.
and it should not hog the spotlight too much. If you get what I'm trying to, if you get what I mean.
Mm.
And additionally, if you can tie the character's growth back to what your characters do or maybe don't do. Like for a quick example, maybe like say there's a young impressionable kid that's a quest giver and he idolizes adventurers, and then maybe your adventuring players are total assholes and they continuously take advantage of this kid. That kid is slowly going to start inculcating the belief that adventurers are all assholes.
Okay.
As a player, you can see how that progresses. You know, like yeah, we swindled this kid multiple times. That's fair. Like that does make sense from a character growth perspective, but it's also the point of like, the character growth can be there, but it shouldn't be the spotlight. Is what I'm trying to say. Because at the end of the day, especially when it comes down to RPGs, your player characters are fundamentally the heroes of the story. So the NPCs can have growth, but it needs basically 2 points. Two things need to happen. A, it needs to be a character that the players constantly interact with. And B, they do need to have the players do need to do things that causes the NPC to show the NPC that whatever worldview they initially had like it's not what they think it is.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
So it's entirely possible that an entire party can go through a whole campaign arc without invoking a single character growth from the NPCs. It's entirely possible.
I see. All right. Okay, I've got another question from user Cheesecake Lord. Right. I think this question is a very that it's like the moment of self-realization kind of question. It's essentially asking, right, how do I stop making my character's backstory edgy? So maybe people have said a few times that this person's character is going to be a bit terrible. I don't know.
Watch yourself, don't cut yourself with a edge.
Yes.
Do you want to go for this, Kevin, or should I?
I'll start this one off. Okay, so
Sure.
Here's the thing. Edginess isn't a bad thing. And I say this with truly all the realization that there is a lot of stigma and sort of bad reputation around this concept of edginess, right? What makes something edgy? Right? That is the question that we really need to discuss, is what makes something edgy. What most people perceive as something that is edgy is something that, is honestly, the number one thing is it's cliche, right? But like I said, sometimes you don't have that. And here's the thing. What makes edgy characters cringy, as people like to say, is not that they're edgy. What makes edgy characters cringy is that they start edgy, they stay edgy, and they refuse to change, right? If you create an edgy backstory, that's fine. That's totally understandable. We are in this fantasy make-believe world. Anything is possible. You can make yourself have an edgy backstory. There's nothing wrong with that. What you need to do is understand that being an edgy person, being from an edgy background, you have flaws and you have growth that you need to achieve, right? You don't start off as Batman. You start off as Bruce Wayne, 10-year-old watching his parents get killed in an alleyway, right? He doesn't wake up the next day as Batman. He goes off and trains and under Ra's al Ghul and all these things, right? He has this journey, this process, and growth, right? That is what makes edgy characters good in that sense, right? You can have good edgy characters, and they are good because you buy into them, because you care about them, right? Their edginess isn't some immediate death knell on this character.
Okay. Any perspectives from you, John?
I would say edgy. I think the big reason why people give so much bad rep to edgy characters is because a lot of edgy characters do play very strongly as a lone wolf type. And so they already don't mesh well with the party. They don't go about with what the party wants or wants to do. Number two is that I think the edgy character is more like a symptom than anything else. If someone's playing an edgy character, unless you know them really well, chances are they're not going to execute it properly. And I think that's where most people have the issue of an edgy character. of like if you're edgy as a character, chances are you're not going to want to play well with the rest of the party, that kind of stuff. Like the problem isn't the edgy character; it's what the edgy character represents in our minds at this point. Like if you tell me like I'm an edgy character, if you give me an edgy character who's willing to, he's a bit rough and gruff around, but he's willing to put that difference aside to work with the party, people are going to be willing to play with that. And I think the big issue with edgy characters is the edginess for the sake of edginess. Like I've read like absolute monstrosities of backstories where it's like, oh, why am I a half orc? Because the warlord came and did horrible things to my mother. I'm like, why is this a thing? Then I asked him straight out, like, why do you have this? And the person basically told me, oh, I've been reading a lot of Game of Thrones, and I'm just like, is there a need for this? Like, what does this serve as a purpose? That you hate orcs? Not really. Then why do you have that there? Like, edginess for the sake of edgy. This is like what I mean by edginess for the sake of edginess. As I say, you have that thing there just because, and you don't really put too much thought into it. Like, you just want to have that very dysfunctional kind of edgy character without thinking how it plays with the rest of the party.
Or understanding why that edginess is essentially earned, right?
Like for example, for example, let's take Zuko from Avatar, because I got them love Avatar. Like Zuko at the start is an edgy character.
Yeah.
He has a scar on his face. He's trying to get back his honor. He's hunting the Avatar, but he's a dimensional character because they delve into why he's like this. That's when the edginess fades, because like you see like, oh, it's actually someone with who's trying to go through their troubles. And I think the big part is that a lot of times when you're playing the game, I guess this holds doubly true for one shots, because you don't get to see why this character acts the way they do. Campaign, you can start to peel away the layers, like, oh, he's like this because of this, that kind of stuff. But in the one shot, you won't get to see that. And I think, again, the whole stigma against the edgy character is just because of the way people try to portray it. It tends to encourage a more selfish kind of portrayal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. All right. Well, so I guess this user Cheesecake Lord has your answer. You can be edgy, just don't be so edgy that you go and burden the entire party, and then it's like everyone's like, oh god, it's this guy again. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we've got time for a few more questions. I've got one from user Tommy. This is an interesting one. Any tips for how I can execute a good political intrigue campaign? My players are focused on killing anyone they come across before asking questions.
Can I answer this first, Kevin? I'm sorry.
Go for it.
I'm sorry, because like I know. Okay, so Kevin does write very good political intrigue, just which is why I'm trying to interject here. First thing first, Tommy. I have found, like, this is personal experience. If players don't like political stuff, they don't even throw that on them, because they fundamentally don't engage with that. Like, you can ask Kevin. There have been times where we play a political one shot, and then there are some players who are like, I don't like. They have no impetus to care about the politics of the world.
Just want to smash things.
They just want to smash things and like break shit. They don't. The point of a good political intrigue campaign, like, we can talk about the minutiae of like how do you get the various families or parties to like counter check each other and everything. And that's part of it. But the fundamental point of rule of a good political intrigue campaign is that your campaign world and your campaign setting has to be A, your players have to be invested in it enough, and B, your players have to be invested enough in the parties to be interested in turning it the way they want it to. The moment you don't have these 2 points, they're not going to engage with the political intrigue story. And that's just how it is. I can't force that on anyone.
Yeah, so let's assume that the players have bought into this idea of political intrigue, and they do want this, but the problem is that their solution to everything is run in, smash things, stab person, did we win yet? Right? If that is their solution to it, there are other ways to seed things in a political intrigue story, right? Like, I assume most of it is pretty written out at that. Like, you have different factions and different machinations. And the one thing I would say about political intrigue that you want to keep in mind, and this is a lot more work on the DM, is things need to be moving in the background. Things need to constantly be moving in the background. They need to be things where there is time sensitivity, and if the players miss something, they miss it. Too bad, there's no going back. You've missed it. But that said, like, if you want to seed that idea and they want to kill the first person they see, it's quite simple that they find incriminating evidence on that person, or maybe like that is the way they get roped into this political intrigue, and it's just like, why did you kill that guy? Like, and it turns out that guy had very important information, and it can then turn into okay, he had important information, but we've killed him. How do we fix this? Maybe we need to go sneak into his house and like root through his things, or maybe we need to figure out who he was talking to or who he's meeting with. Maybe we need to pretend to be him, something along those lines, right? There are ways to sort of save a political intrigue storyline, even if the player's first instinct is runny, stabby, stabby, yay, right? There are a lot of ways to solve it. It's more sort of just, if you then put that in front of them and they still don't want to do it, then sad to say, as much as you've written, and I feel that pain, I have written plenty of political intrigue stories that session 0, everyone builds their characters. Session 1, first thing, I would like to stab the guard. Rip.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think. Let's see. Yeah, I think we have time for one last question. By user Gremlink. Okay, so this is quite an interesting question. Players get invested in their characters. How do you deal with player character deaths?
Oh, ending on a downer.
Respectfully, I hope. This entire I've had to deal with this before. It entirely depends on the tone of the story you're trying to tell. Mm-hmm. And how long of a campaign it is, because honestly, if it's a character death during a one shot, most of us don't really blink an eye at this point. It's like, oh yeah, I'm not invested. But I guess especially for like public games, it can be tricky. It is like, if it's the way I do it is, if the character has earned that heroic moment, I tend to give them a character death that's worthy of the gravitas of the situation. If the character died from their own sheer negligent choices,
like trying to bed the dragon.
Like trying to you know the usual tropes, you know. Antagonize the 9th level caster or something like that. Like that kind of stuff. Like that I try to narrate it nicely, but I will be the first to admit I'm not too empathetic about those situations, as horrible as that sounds, because I find it really difficult when, like, for say, like this, let's say the person you're talking to is the archmage or a lich, and you're like level 4, and then you purposely go antagonize this lich, which you can tell is a lich. Like, I've told you multiple times, this is a lich. They are very powerful. You don't have a chance, and you still want to antagonize him, and then you die. I find it very hard to empathize personally. Because to me, it's like I've given you ample warning to tell you, like, this is not a good idea.
Okay.
But if you're talking about the more like longer form campaign stuff, I think, look, when players are invested in their characters, the one thing they want to know is that their characters made an impact. That their choices mattered. I think that's the biggest deal. So I think the death, if you really want to deal with it very well, the death should achieve something. Like maybe a goal or something, or if let's say the character dies before they can do something like that, I let them have like some sort of heroic stand. Like, okay, like maybe like the character is a cleric or something, and like they've been given a single chance to do one thing to change the course of the field. I'll let them do that sometimes. Like, it's to give the character that kind of like moment, of the death moment, where they really change the outcome for the rest of the party. And then number 2 is afterward is the giving the rest of the characters the time to grieve for their character.
So it's like a closure, basically, in that sense.
Yeah. Because the players and the characters need that closure of like, oh, this person saved our lives, and like they need that chance to roleplay that out and gain the closure that while that character is gone, we still remember the character.
Makes sense.
I think from my perspective, just real quick, is that even the characters that start off as a joke, as a meme, like they can become something that a player gets very invested in, and even if the death was quote unquote ultimately meaningless, like that grief is still a very natural thing, and it's something that I think everyone at the table like should on some level respect. Like something along the lines of just having a session where you bury the dead, right? Having a session where you give a send off, like even if it's not a session, it could even be, hey guys, like we lost a good friend and party member such and such. Let's go grab like supper or a drink or a kopi or something, just like to commemorate this character's life. Something as simple as that can be a world of difference, because like characters die, and ultimately you cannot be afraid as a player to have character death, but you also cannot treat your own death lightly. And the same goes for a DM. Like you can't be afraid of player death, but at the same time you cannot be flippant about it.
I'm afraid of player death, not character death, mind you.
All right.
Don't go killing your players, guys. That's illegal. And the body's hard to hide.
A PC death, I should say. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So, regrettably, guys, right? Even though this has been quite informative, personally for myself as well, and I'm sure for the audience watching, right? That's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for volunteering your time with us, sharing all these little nuggets of information, and as well as working with us tirelessly over the past 3 weeks, right, on the technicals of the series and everything. So I'm sure that this has been very useful for many that have been watching, and guys, do check out Royal Nerd Theatre on YouTube, where they've actually helped us to post up this entire series. And I'm also aware that you've got some new content planned for the coming months. You want to give us a little bit of a sneak peek on that?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much, RPGCA, for having us on and for working with us. Like, I speak for all of us at R&T. Like, we look forward to many more collaborations in the future. But as for moving forward, R&T, we've taken a little bit of a break because of this circuit breaker period. It kind of caught us a little bit unawares, so we didn't have a lot of content ready to go. So for those of you who do watch our series, Dyson Dynasty, you will know it's been a while since we posted. Something that I think it's good to announce is we are looking at doing a soft reboot of the Dyson Dynasty series. That's not to say like we are completely scrapping it. We're coming back to it. We just want to do a soft reboot because there are a few things that we think we could have done better the first time around, and having this time off essentially to really think about it and talk about it, we've come to the conclusion that if we have the chance to do it again, let's do it again and let's do it better. So a soft reboot of Dyson Dynasty is coming up in the near future. Other than that, I am going to be running a podcast series on R&T's channel. John is running a podcast on R&T channel that may or may not go beyond the scope of just D&D. And I'm also in the works of doing another campaign series, which we want to explore further the idea of, East Asian culture, Southeast Asian culture, like just the Asian identity within this gaming sphere, and I want to explore that beyond the scope of just D&D. So I have another series planned that's going to be non-D&D, but still in this sort of vein of exploring like East Asian culture.
Okay, well, thanks for giving us that sort of preview. Look forward to seeing look forward to seeing exactly what is this mystery, there's a system or like this gonna be used. Okay, so everyone else, we've come to the end of our webinar series, and we at the RPGCA sincerely thank all of you for joining us on this journey. Stay tuned to our Facebook and our Discord in the coming months, where we will be unfolding various projects and events right in the gaming community. So, till the next time we see you, stay safe and keep gaming. Good night, everyone.
Good night, guys. Stay safe.
Good night, everyone. See ya.